Chapter 15. Callie had drifted in and out for some time she couldn't measure. Sometimes painful things were being done to her. Sometimes voices talked over her, one of them rather harsh and impatient. And sometimes there was just peace, broken only by mechanical sounding clicks and whirs and beeps. And an occasional soft whine that was familiar. She had no idea how long she'd been out of it, and she was a bit fuzzy on the events that had occurred before she had lost consciousness. I was shot by an arrow because I was dumb mostly. Luther patched me up as best he could, and then I was on the litter. A long way to Jacoby's cabin, I think. What then? Don't remember. When she finally forced open her eyes, the first thing she realized was that Caesar was lying beside her on the bed, the hospital bed. He was mostly alongside her legs, which put his big head at just about her hip level. The one she recognized was him, worried about her. She moved her hand, finding just enough energy to lift it and place it on the broad head of her anxious dog. Hey, boy. Scare me. Don't. Sorry. She saw the IV taped to her hand and frowned a little, her gaze following the tubing up to a bag of clear liquid. So you're finally back with us. Don't ever scare me like that again. Callie turned her head and saw Luther sitting in a chair on the other side of the bed. His face was calm, but haggard, weary. Beyond him, to her surprise, she saw squeezed into a corner a long couch with a rather loud print fabric, and on it, in a pile, were Jacoby's 3 dogs sound asleep. She returned her gaze to Luther, brows lifting in a mute question. They'd been the rules in small-town clinics, he told her. Caesar wasn't about to leave you, which nobody here decided to argue about, though he stuffed himself outside the operating room and waited there patiently until they wheeled you out. And the other 3 decided the same, or followed his lead, whichever. Point is, they're allowed. Besides, there's only one other patient here at the moment, recovering from an appendectomy, and she's at the other end of the building. We moved that god-awful couch in from the waiting room so the dogs would have a place to nap. Rugs are frowned upon, apparently, as tripping hazards. He paused, then said, The docs here approved your work on me, just so you know. Other than a fresh bandage, I was good to go. Your wound was a bit trickier because, as it turned out, the arrow nicked an artery. That's why you lost so much blood. But they were able to repair the tear and replace at least some of the blood you lost. You can probably walk out of here in a couple of days. Callie absorbed that. Now that she was awake, she felt surprisingly well, so apparently that long sleep had done her good. Here, he was holding a glass with a straw in front of her, some water. Your throat is probably too dry to try talking. She sipped the water, felt her indeed dry and slightly sore throat relax. After that, she was able to ask the question uppermost in her mind, even if a bit huskily. Jacoby? Dead. Without going into details about that, Luther continued in a slightly wry voice. While the docs were working on you, I talked to the sheriff. Despite what you said, it appears he's enjoying the unusual excitement in his town, even with retirement looming. Said it was the most interesting his job had ever been, and he only wished he'd known what was happening sooner. Mind you, he doesn't have to be up on the mountain with the feds and search teams who've been at it since dawn, and he did show the requisite sober regret for the girl, even if she wasn't a local, but they found her? Yeah, a couple of hours ago, just as you said, in a shallow grave, and dismembered. Well, actually cut into smaller pieces. No local or even regional missing girl or woman matching the general description of her face, hair, and eye color. They're comparing that info to missing person reports, female, all up and down the Blue Ridge and into adjoining states. But it's a long list. In the meantime, they'll run her fingerprints, try to match dental records, or failing that DNA. I'm told it could take weeks, though the feds sent everything to their lab and say it should be quicker than that, at least if her prints or DNA are on file. In the meantime, there's an army up on the mountain, some looking for more bodies nobody wants to find, some looking for the stolen money everybody wants to find, and a few still processing the section of mine shaft Jacoby used for his torture chamber. It's a couple 100 yards higher up from his cabin. I got a description from one of the feds, and that's all I want. Don't need to see the place. It's late morning on Saturday, if you're wondering. We got here last night, almost certainly thanks to Caesar. He ran in front of the truck, showing me the way through that insane tangle of old mining and logging roads. Without his help, we'd still be up there on the mountain, and you'd likely be dead. The docs here told me if we got into the clinic even an hour later, you likely wouldn't have made it. Callie absorbed all that, her hand resting on Caesar's head, fingers absently pulling gently on his silky ears. Thanks, pal. Happy. Luther cocked his head, looking back and forth from her to her dog. You two really do communicate telepathically? Something like that. Picking up on it? I think so. He was cautious. I'm still getting used to this stuff, but there have been a few times since yesterday I caught what seemed to be a word or two, and it didn't seem like a person. No, his thoughts are different, partly emotional, sometimes concepts more than words. With other dogs, like Jacoby's 3, it's almost entirely emotion and really unfocused. They haven't worked with a telepath the way Caesar's worked with me his whole life. He's learned to use words to express his thoughts and emotions. They don't know how to do that, at least not yet. Planning on working with them, are you? Maybe, probably. Though I'm not sure about the details. I travel a lot. Caesar travels with me, but 4 dogs traveling with me would probably be a bit much. Well, I had a feeling you want to find them a safe home. I called Maggie at Haven. There are already several dogs at the main house and throughout the compound. Most are pets of operatives or employees. Some belong to Maggie and John. Big place, kind people. Lots of acreage on which to safely run if that's what they like. Maggie said they're welcome. He paused, then added, and you'd be welcome to visit them as often as you like. Work with them yourself or teach 1 or 2 Haven operatives how to do it. Like you? Luther met her gaze, his own a little amused, and something else. Haven has plenty of telepaths, and so does the SCU, but telepaths who can communicate with animals. Let's just say that opens up interesting possibilities. After witnessing firsthand the sort of thing Caesar can do, the kind of help he can offer in dangerous situations, because guiding me off the mountain was his idea, not mine, I'm fairly anxious to learn more about those interesting possibilities. Callie nodded slowly, thoughtfully. I imagine Bishop would give me time to spend at Haven so we could explore those possibilities. I mean, bound to be helpful to have more investigative tools for the toolbox. That was my thinking. I imagine we can work something out. It was Luther's turn to nod, gravely. For the sake of psychic research, if nothing else. Absolutely. Flirting, Caesar wanted to know. Callie was momentarily startled, since it wasn't a word or even a concept that she had worked on with her dog, but she supposed it was certainly possible he had picked up the concept on his own, because he was a very smart dog and he was acutely observant when it came to the subtleties of human behavior. Not subtle. She stared at her relaxed dog for a moment, gazing into calm brown eyes, then returned her attention to Luther as he laughed. Nope, not subtle at all. I suppose you can work on that, or just not bother. It's been less than a week, she pointed out. It's been a lifetime, 2 lifetimes. You have to admit, a lot was packed into the last few days. You saved my life, Caesar and I saved yours. I think there's a Chinese proverb or something about a saved life belonging to you, so in our case... Don't you dare, Callie said, trying not to laugh. It's a 3-way, he said, with unexpected and rather beguiling humor. Though that can stay just between us, assuming Caesar gets it and agrees to keep it to himself. Agree. Caesar closed his eyes with a sigh, able to relax at last and get some sleep, tuning out the humans who at their cores were utterly certain they were his guardians and not the other way around. Amusing creatures, humans. Bishop emerged from the mine shaft's narrow door, the door put into place and heavily barred decades ago when the shaft had been closed, and Tony didn't have to ask why. Whatever he'd seen inside had been bad. The scar on the left side of Bishop's face, usually almost invisible, was pale in contrast to his tan, and a sure sign of emotional turmoil that was otherwise hidden. Since this was not technically their investigation, or at least not one Tony had been involved in, he had elected to remain outside and had been watching searchers, some with cadaver dogs, combing the mountain slope all around the mine shaft. Now, as their unit chief joined them, Tony merely asked, "Do you think they'll find more bodies?" Bishop shook his head once. "I don't think there was time." Cole Jacoby wasn't a killer, and this wasn't about killing. I doubt he was even consciously aware of doing what he did. Judging by what was found in the shaft, the girl was a hiker. She made 2 bad mistakes. She went hiking alone, and she went hiking in this area. She was a victim of opportunity, almost dropped in Jacoby's lap. If it wasn't about killing, it was about increasing the level of negative energy he was able to channel. So he, or rather it, could open this side of the vortex. Yeah. Tony thought about it. "So weren't you taking a chance having Hollis on the other side of the vortex? I mean, I get that you believed only a powerful medium could have closed that end, and in such a way as to get rid of a lot of the dark energy, but with her there, it was a certainty that she'd draw even more energy to gather all around her. It was a chance we had to take." "You were counting on Callie and Luther being able to keep Jacoby distracted just long enough." "Something like that." Tony eyed him. "You knew both of them would be wounded. It really wasn't a question. Some things have to happen just the way they happen. So whoever you and Haven sent here was going to get hurt. Callie and Luther needed to be here." Too accustomed to uninformative replies, Tony sighed and said, "Well, both teams got the job done. But didn't Maggie warn you that Luther might not be at all pleased by how things went down?" Luther met Callie. Bishop turned and began to head back down the slope. "Let's go, Tony." "Sounds like a line in a song," Tony complained, following him. Luther met Callie. "That had to happen too, huh?" "It had to happen here." "You going to tell them that?" "Of course not." Since the slope was treacherous in places, Tony concentrated on not falling on his ass, not speaking again until they reached their Jeep, parked on one of the old logging roads. "I still don't get where the money ties into everything," he complained as he climbed in the passenger side. It was awfully convenient that Jacoby stumbled on both sides of a vortex. Bishop started the Jeep and guided it through the crowd of other vehicles, then turned toward town as usual, finding his way easily, despite the confusing network of dirt roads and sometimes hardly more than paths crisscrossing each other. "Boss." After a moment, Bishop said, "Energy affects most of us, you know that. In an inexperienced or latent psychic, the right kind of energy can guide or even control the psychic on an unconscious level." He was being controlled all along. I doubt that Jacoby was anywhere near powerful enough himself to have stolen time and memories from 2 agents. And before that, the seeds were probably planted before he was caught, and likely even before the robbery. It was far too ambitious a heist for him based on his history and known skills, and there were too many little glitches in the building security systems that helped him pull it off. Glitches caused by energy? No way to prove it, but I'm guessing yes. But that would mean there was energy involved long before he put the 2 agents out. Yes, he suffered a head injury during a fairly brief prison stay when he was quite a bit younger. And head injuries often turn latents into active psychics. Bishop nodded. He might never have been aware of the change in him, but since it probably started in prison, it's virtually certain that the first energy he was exposed to as an active psychic was negative energy. "Yeah, I remember Callie talking about how negative the energy is in prisons, worse than just about any other place," she said. "And strong. I doubt Jacoby could have resisted even if he'd known what was happening to him." Tony thought about that, hanging on as the Jeep bumped its way over the rough logging road. So it was no coincidence that Jacoby just happened to rent a cabin built literally on top of one end of an energy vortex. There are no coincidences. The dark energy was already in him when a bored prisoner looked up information on himself and discovered a half-sister he hadn't known about. He had internet access in prison. At that point, he was a non-violent offender. He had internet access to the guard looking over his shoulder. A guard with no way of knowing that the family research Jacoby was engaged in could produce anything dangerous. Okay, and then he researched his half-sister, then the Alexander family she'd married into, read about Alexander House. When he got out of prison that time, he actually stayed there, but neither Anna nor her brother-in-law were in residence. And we know all this how? Not exactly answering. Bishop said, we'll find his name in the guest registry. He stayed at the hotel for a week nearly 2 years ago. Long before the bank robbery. Yes. And on that trip to Alexander House, he passed through Devil's Gap, it being the closest town to the hotel. Tony waited a moment, then asked, and he was drawn here, to this mountain. Why? That head injury in prison. He was already doing things he couldn't have logically explained. Going to Alexander House to meet the sister he hadn't known existed was probably one of the last real decisions or choices he actually made with a clear mind. Ironic. Because that was the beginning of the end for Jacoby. The end probably would have come eventually, since he was bound to land back in jail at some point and again be surrounded by dark energy, but visiting Alexander House and then coming to this mountain sealed his fate. Tony didn't find that at all melodramatic, which rather surprised him. He wasn't strong enough to fight it, I gather. No. We both know evil, Tony. It's insidious, especially if you don't know it's lurking. By the time he realized, if he even did, it was far too late for him to regain control. So it was something else in him, that evil, that wanted him at the cabin. On one side of a natural but very powerful energy vortex. Tony remained silent this time until, to his relief, a logging road finally spilled them out onto a real, if winding, blacktop road. Then he spoke slowly. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Jacoby being controlled like that, being lured so specifically, implies that the energy had a consciousness long before Alexander House or Devil's Gap or that cabin back there. Bishop was silent. So Tony tried again. Or maybe was being used by a consciousness, at least in the beginning, before any dark energy at the mouth of a vortex could come out and play. Maybe by a single human mind. Not so sure about the human part, Bishop said finally. Wait a minute, this was done by a person? You heard the sheriff. Not counting the victim, there were only 3 people up here this last week. Callie, Luther, and Jacoby. All were affected by the energy of the vortex, but only Jacoby was being controlled by it. So whoever it was, whoever started everything, they weren't on the mountain. No. Do you know who it was? I have my suspicions. Suspicions Tony knew Bishop would keep to himself until he was certain of his facts. Despite the truth that his agents and operatives were more often than not left in the dark about certain facts of their investigations, Bishop virtually always knew more than he shared, and sometimes that was a lot. The point, Bishop said, is that we won this round. There'll be another, Tony asked warily. The jeep rounded a curve and came suddenly upon the rather odd little town called Devil's Gap, and as Bishop drove down the single main street toward the town's single medical clinic, he said, "One thing I've learned is that sometimes an enemy can haunt you for a long time." Hollis was thoroughly exasperated. He has the jet, and he could certainly get a chopper from the airport. Where the hell didn't he get here last night? Brooke didn't say he would, DeMarco reminded her calmly. She just said he was on his way. And is he coming by way of California, from a starting point of somewhere near Boston? I have no idea. She glared at him. Why are you so calm? Yesterday you were pissed at him. I'm still pissed. but also very curious. For one thing, even you admitted it wasn't like a spirit to offer such very specific information as Brooke did about the money. Nor is it usual for a spirit to then warn us to keep quiet about it until Bishop got here. Yeah, that part of it is seriously annoying, especially after she pointed the finger at Owen. Could barely look at him last night, and I'm glad we haven't seen him yet today. She frowned. Are you packed? Yeah, same as you. He leaned in the doorway to his bedroom and watched her pacing their shared sitting room. I imagine our hosts are wondering why we haven't left yet. Probably haven't left their own bedrooms. I don't think we've even seen them before 10. We've ever seen them before 10, have we? No, neither one seems to be an early riser. But it's nearly 10 now, right? Like most SCU agents, Hollis couldn't wear a watch. In fact, if she got too close, and most certainly if she touched it, she could stop the clock easily. DeMarco was the rare SCU agent who could wear a watch, but this morning when he looked at the one on his wrist, she knew that had changed. Stopped on you, huh? Yeah, he didn't sound either surprised or annoyed, merely matter-of-fact. But the clock in my head is still working. It's 9:45. Okay. I say we take our bags and head downstairs. If Bishop isn't here by the time we get the car loaded, we can damn well either confront Owen or start looking for the money ourselves. We only have Brooke's word for it that Anna even has a half-brother. I couldn't find any trace of that information last night, remember? Gloomy, she said, yeah, but you also couldn't get very deeply into the genealogy stuff, not with the internet connections here. Besides, Bishop knew. You heard it in his voice when we called him, just like I did. He was just evasive enough to let it show. What I can't figure out is what's up with all the weird secrecy. This kind of secrecy, I should say, and the delay. Can you remember a case where he put his agents on hold until he got there himself? It's not exactly what he's doing. Because this wasn't supposed to be a case. He knew it was a case when he sent us here. Whether he knew for sure when he sent us might be open for debate, but I'm betting one thing he was certain of was that he needed 2 teams in specific places to accomplish whatever his goal was. He knew about the vortex. Maybe he needed us here to confirm it and to help close it, but he knew about it. And the money? Hollis was frowning. Did Bishop know Owen hasn't? I don't know. Maybe. He's got such a damn Machiavellian mind. It's sure as hell possible. And it's gonna get him in trouble one day. Serious trouble. Most of us seem to be in agreement on that point. She said, yeah, I know. Come on, let's go downstairs. I can't stand just waiting around without doing anything. You won't get an argument.